The Iron Duke by L. Ron Hubbard. Two men strode hurriedly through the black of the Aldorian night, shadows against the darker shadow of brush along the edge of the field. Beyond them, against the stars, loomed the foothills of the Balkan spur known as Baukist Range. Far off, a train whistled three ghostly notes.
"I'm froze,"
said the shorter man.
Why didn't you tell me it was this cold in the Balkans?"
Quit chattering. If a patrol hears those teeth, they'll think we've got a machine gun.
Don't mention machine guns. They'll make me think of firing squads. Gosh, Blacky, aren't we ever gonna get across the frontier?
Take it easy, sweetheart. When I stopped running back there, we crossed the frontier. We're in Aldoria.
Blacky, what do we do for passports?
We'll think about that if we meet up with the patrol.
Yeah, but we can't use our own. The Nazi government would extradite us, and it's too cold to get shot.
Take it easy, sweetheart. Hear that?
The shorter one paused and listened to the nearing hoot of a train, and then had to speed up to catch his companion, who was increasing his pace. About a mile away, the headlight of the locomotive was growing.
We can't get on that. We don't have any Aldorian dough, and they'll ask for our passports, and the Nazi government...
Have I ever let you down?
Said the taller one crisply.
No. Yeah! You said they wouldn't find out them artillery shells was loaded with sand, and that the machine guns had solid barrels until we collected the cash. Now look at us, broke in a postage Balkan state. Why didn't you let us try for the coast where it's warm?
Somewhere around here, there will be a grave marked Stub Doyle, unless I hear large quantities of quiet.
Okay, Blacky, but when I think of that nice checkered topcoat back in...
Blacky Lee stepped off the track and hauled Stub Doyle with him. The locomotive snorted and squealed and rattled to a halt beyond the station, leaving the last car abreast of the two. Blacky Lee fumbled with the door and finally got it open. He gave Stub a boost and then swiftly followed himself. Blacky closed the door and motioned along the aisle. The train was already starting when they found an empty compartment, and shortly after, when the trainmaster glanced in on his way by, his attention was in no way attracted by the passengers therein, curled on the seats. Stub Doyle, as soon as the menace was past, paid more and more attention to Blacky Lee. Blacky was sitting up again, looking absently through the window at the flying night. He was a handsome fellow. His mouth was pleasant, his teeth even and flawless, and his jaw strong. His ginger-colored mustache was usually neatly trimmed, but never pointed. He had the easy, careless air of the cosmopolitan, and there was something about him that suggested that he commanded any situation in which he found himself. Stub always had an uneasy feeling about Blacky Lee. Stub's state of mind was that of a man watching another holding a cannon cracker and not knowing just when he'd let that cracker explode. At least once a day, Stub wondered why he had ever allowed himself to become associated with as nerve-wracking a fellow as Blacky Lee. Blacky Lee had come out of his reverie and was now, by aid of his reflection in the glass, carefully twirling his ginger mustache into a pair of military points. Never, in all the years he had been with Blacky, had Stub known him to carry wax or use wax, and now, with their baggage abandoned in Austria, a thing as nonsensical as mustache wax was here in Blacky's possession. Stub gave over wondering. He sighed and rested his little round face in his pudgy hands.
There was such a nice bottle of anisette in my trunk. Do you suppose we'll ever see that bottle again, Blacky?
Probably never.
In that nice new suit with the yellow stripes.
It's probably adorning the porter of the King's Hotel. if his taste in clothes is as bad as yours.
Gosh, you really think so, Blacky?
You're lucky not to have that suit full of holes, with you in back of each hole.
Yeah. You're always telling me how lucky I am to be alive. You pull me through hell and high dives with one of your ideas, and then we escape on the razor's edge of execution, and you tell me how lucky I am. I'm not complaining, you understand, but sometimes I think my nerves just won't stand it anymore. Tonight, we should have been dining with generals and getting paid real money. But here we are, on a train without tickets, in a country we didn't legally enter, without so much as an Aldorian dime or a forged birth certificate.
You haven't forgotten how to use a pen.
Yeah. Now I haven't even got a pen. Sometimes, Blacky.
The train came to a screaming halt, nearly throwing Stubb into the middle of the floor. He clutched the sill, staring with terrified eyes at Blacky.
That conductor saw us. The Austrians figured we'd shuttle across the frontier and snag this rattler. Hell's bells, Blacky. What are we gonna do now?
Sit tight and hope. It's impossible that they could have extradited us that fast.
They'd send word that we were in the country without papers. Oh, Blacky, I can hear the rats in the dungeon already.
Blacky was giving the troops outside the window an interested examination. A patrol, booted and greatcoated, was splashing flashlights along the side of the track and boarding the train at the next car.
We're in for it now, and me without so much as a drink.
They sat very still, hearing the patrol going through the cars ahead. The search was coming closer. Their compartment door was thrown open by the trainmaster, who consulted his record so as to address the occupants by name. The lieutenant in charge of the patrol was all business as he waited for the trainmaster to speak up.
"Well?"
said the dark-faced lieutenant.
"Your Honor,"
said the trainmaster, trembling.
"I have no record of the two gentlemen in there."
Aha!
And the lieutenant, with all the savor of a bloodhound at last treeing his quarry, thrust himself into the room, one hand resting on the butt of his gun. The lieutenant's smile of triumph suddenly congealed upon his face, and then, from the eyes down, there dropped a curtain of fumbling terror. This, in turn, was swept away by a stolid parade ground expression, and looking straight ahead, his heels close together, the lieutenant spoke.
"My apologies, Your Highness. We were searching for one Belchard, leader of the Sons of Freedom, reported to have been on this train. My stupidity, Your Highness, is only that of zeal. May I be granted the favor of remaining on board and posting adequate guard of your compartment?"
I do not care to have attention called to my presence aboard the Trans-Balkan Express. You are excused, Lieutenant. Carry on.
The lieutenant, embarrassed, about-faced and marched out. Angrily, he motioned his men from the corridor. The trainmaster stood blinking and peering, stupefied.
"Is there anything your Highness could wish, sire?"
Yes. A bottle of anisette for my friend and a ham sandwich for myself.
"Immediately, your Highness."
And he stumbled away. Stubb looked slack-jawed at Blacky Lee, finding it difficult to force a question out of his constricted throat.
Your Highness? They called you Your Highness?
Blacky smiled. The train had started again, and he sank back, staring thoughtfully out of the window at the flying night. Stubb was nervous. He lay upon a bed which seemed an acre of silk, and stared restlessly around a room in which a company might have drilled. This was the imperial suite of the Crown Hotel at the famous spa of Draken, some 60 kilometers from the capital. But when he closed his eyes, he imagined an unwavering line of Nazi rifles, muzzles foremost, with cold, uncaring eyes behind each set of sights. He had to lie there and suffer. For Blacky Lee was in a jovial mood. Blacky would say that such popularity was a certain indication of their true worth. Blacky would point out the silken draperies, the lovely little angels that were flying around chain fashion on the ceiling, the gold trim on the bureaus and the thickness of the rugs, and bid him be gay. Blacky had already done that, but it had not kept Stubb from suffering through the whole of a long day. Blacky would give out no information. But Stubb knew in the depths of his soul that Blacky Lee was about to haul him through further hell and high dives, and that he, blindly following, would again have visions of firing squads. As a respectful knock sounded upon the door, Blacky reared up from his bed, put on his big dark goggles, and called.
Come in.
An effeminate, smirking little man minced into the room carrying a small box. Behind him came assistants, each one carrying a larger box.
Does Your Highness wish a further fitting? We've had to accomplish this in such a hurry that I am very afraid you'll not be wholly pleased.
No more fussing. Get out.
Yes, Your Highness.
And the little man directed the boxes to be put down and then backed himself and his assistants out, closing the door softly behind him. Stubb groaned and relaxed. Blacky took off the dark goggles and began to tear the boxes open. Stubb dumbly fixed his eyes upon the window, through which he could see the dying sun. How could he know but that when next he saw it, he would be back to a wall? Presently, a gratified mutter came from Blacky Lee. He was standing before a full-length mirror, surveying himself in a suit of tails, turning a little this way and that.
Not like London, but it'll have to do.
For a moment, Stubb felt a pang of envy. He wished he could look as swell as that in clothes. And then he was shaken by new alarm.
You're not going out to dine?
Why not?
But whatever the hell you're up to, you might get caught. Maybe you're using hypnotism on these guys. Maybe you've gotten us into this place and put us in the royal suite and got some clothes. But there's a limit, even to your luck.
Get dressed.
I'm scared. I don't talk this my-gar lingo like you.
Mygar. Well, talk French. That's it. You're a famous French physician.
Me? Sawbones? Why, I couldn't patch up a blister.
You're Dr. Cartier, the famous French psychiatrist. Yes, that's it. Pierre Cartier, specialist in abnormal psychology. Get dressed.
Blacky put on his dark glasses, and then a red satin-lined opera cape. He looked at himself again and topped off with a high hat. Satisfied, he strolled to the door.
I'll take a turn in the garden. Come down when you are ready.
Oh,
Blacky, swinging a stick, strolled down the hall and the wide staircase. Blacky had wandered down the walk and was now disappearing on the shrubbery-lined paths of the garden. It was a very pleasant evening, mellow with the promise of warmer weather. Blacky swung his stick and did not notice the stir he created. He saw ahead of him a woman in a white satin gown and ermine evening cloak. She seemed to be waiting for him on the edge of a dark byway, and Blacky, wondering hopefully, quickened his pace. As he drew nearer, he saw a diamond tiara sparkling in the soft sheen of her dark hair and a simple but expensive bracelet upon her creamy white wrist. It was difficult to make out her face in these shadows, but he could suddenly feel the intensity of her.
Philip.
He inclined his head, coming to a stop 2 paces away from her. Lord, how beautiful she was!
Philip, you fool. I've ridden 20 kilometers to get you out of this place. What devil possessed you to show your face here? Are you out of your wits? If I, 20 kilometers away at my castle, heard you had come to Draken, then Belchert, who has a dozen spies for every one of mine, is either here or will be here. Soak up as much whiskey as you please. Loll in bed for the rest of your life. But have the decency and sense to know that your stupidity and carelessness may put all of our lives at risk.
To hear is to obey.
She had started to speak again, but she stopped and took a step closer to him, peering intently at his face. Her perfume went swirling around him like a gentle drug.
I must say, there is something very odd about all this. You seem a little taller, straighter, and your voice...
Perhaps, my lady, you have never before seen me sober.
Ah, then you are sober. For once in your wasteful, utterly useless life.
But she was still looking at him oddly. Her tone changed a little, became softer and more gentle.
You weren't bad when you were a child, Philip. If you could cure yourself of all your rottenness, I might even marry you yet.
I could never hope so high.
Gallantry. From you. This is too much. You, who have always hated me and everything I stood for.
A famous French physician, Dr. Pierre Cartier, has created me a changed man, my lady. I see the errors of my ways, and certainly a man that was even a third a man could not help but fall deeply in love with a woman as beautiful as you.
You mock. And we stand here chattering while any number of Belchert's devils may be on their way. I could not wait for my guard. My carriage is there upon the road. Come with me instantly.
But how regrettable. I cannot accept. I have a dinner engagement.
You fool! You simpering fool! You may have gotten the whiskey husk out of your voice and the hump out of your shoulders, but your brains aren't changed. You stubborn, selfish whelp! Can't you understand even danger? And this is true danger. I never knew of you being brave before, Philip.
Not brave. It's only that I cannot be rude. A dinner engagement.
With some of your future women. I cannot force you into sense. My guard will be here within the hour. And you'll go, even if I have to drag you. You can't put us all in jeopardy to satisfy your own sordid ideas of pleasure. You imbecile.
And she swished past him so that he had to step back and allow her to go. The scent of her hung in the air for some seconds, and then it blended with the fragrance of spring, and Blacky leaned weakly upon his cane and stared down the path which she had taken.
My lord, what a woman.
He was only half back to reality when a soft voice behind him startled him.
Your Highness?
He whirled. A dark blanket swooped upon him, and strong arms instantly pinioned him. He started to shout, but when he dragged in a breath, the sickish odor of chloroform came with it. From far, far off, he heard someone say,
You might have rushed it, fool.
I had to know it was him for certain, sir.
This way.
If Blacky Lee was ill when he came around, he gave no sign of it. He was seated at the head of a long table, unbound and not crumpled, but only relieved of his armament. Away from him went a long, dark board festooned with hazy islands of paper and lighted by 9 candles thrust into the tops of tall bottles. Overhanging the table was a series of arches, soot-blackened and cobwebbed, sweeping down to push heavily outward against the bare, harsh walls of stone. There were 13 other men about the board, 13 faces, passionate and intelligent, pale from hiding and too little food and too much brooding, mysterious and inhuman in the uncertain flickering of the candles. Far down the board from Blacky sat a man all in black, whose features seemed hybrid from a hawk and a wolf, sharp and merciless and mocking. The man seemed to burn darkly within, for his eyes gleamed, changing from languor to madness as he spoke. All eyes were upon Blacky Lee. From a thin young devil on Blacky's left came the muttered snarl.
I say we kill the fitty swine.
Several heads nodded in agreement. The man at the foot of the table spoke.
I am Belchard. You have heard of my plan, comrade? Huh? I lead the society which must save Aldoria from the idiotic cruelty of a tyrant. You see here the key members of the Sons of Freedom. But tonight, Your Highness, we are not under the guns of your bodyguard. On the contrary, Your Highness.
Does anyone have a drink of brandy?
Give this swine his brandy.
A bottle and a glass were passed up the board, and Lee poured himself a drink. He sipped it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Tonight, the fate of Aldoria is to be decided.
Who has a cigarette?
The young devil on his left angrily snapped open a case, and Blacky lighted up from the nearest candle. He sank back, lolled one leg over the arm of his chair, and thoughtfully regarded the spiraling smoke.
Schwein.
You know, of course, that the majority of these present have a decided leaning toward the idea of putting you to death here and now.
I shouldn't wonder.
This overtaxed and enslaved land would then be rid of its unwanted and incompetent ruler. You know, all of us have been your enforced guests at one time or another. Your Minister Grotch is very clever and efficient, but only in matters of conscienceless bribery and graft. The intrigues of your detestable Countess Zita and the activities of her private espionage corps are only to be equaled by the power and cunning of my own. You and Crouch and the Countess Zita must be removed. You, because you are a stupid drunkard. Grotch, because he is a rapacious villain. And Zita, because she has acquired too much power.
The one with dark hair.
You mock us?
On the contrary, I take so little interest in these such things.
The will of the people should be and will be of the government. Aldoria must be freed.
What makes you think it will be any freer in the hands of communists than in the hands of royalty?
What's this?
Why, in one case, one knows to whom things belong. But in the other, nobody ever knows. How much is Russia paying you to hand the Balkans to her, Belchard?
There was an angry stir about the table, but there was also question and concern in some of the glances.
So as long as royalty rules, the Allied forces hold the balance of power in the Balkans. As soon as you are in power, Russia will snatch up and enslave and crush all the other states on these borders.
You are wiser in these things than I gave you credit for being. You are definitely interested then in the political and international aspect of this situation?
On the contrary, I am interested only in another drink of brandy.
There was considerable whispering about the table, and then word was passed down to Belchard. The young devil on Blacky's left said,
Kill the filthy swine and have it done with.
Your Highness, we know that your interests are mainly in bottles and evening gowns, and that anything outside Paris bores you.
Blacky looked at the ceiling and took a drag on the cigarette.
We are about to make a suggestion, Your Highness, which you will probably receive with gladness. If you were to declare an election to stop this unrest, you'd know what the outcome of that election would be. The Sons of Freedom would win. The people will gladly exchange our idealism for your own bestial rule.
Go on.
Ah, then you are interested. Supposing, Your Highness, that you were to declare an election, which is a modern thing to do, and gives the people a chance to choose their own form of government.
Yes.
And supposing, Your Highness, that in return you were guaranteed 5 million francs placed to your credit in Paris Bank upon the condition of your accepting those election returns. Huh?
Supposing that the sum was 20 million francs.
Or 10?
12, then.
12. You are a wise fellow, Your Highness. You know that you would never be able to collect or touch such a sum without having to remain in the country. And even then, it would be difficult. Here, we have a few papers, mere guarantees of faith.
By all means.
How fortunate to find you sober for a change.
How fortunate we met.
The first paper which was handed to him was an outright abdication, all prepared and waiting for his signature. He looked his question and at once received a statement of faith signed by Balchard, listing the terms accompanied by a promissory note guaranteeing the sum in Paris. Blacky put out his hand and a pen was placed in it. The pen scratched out, Philip, Archduke of Aldoria. Balchard's hands trembled when he took the paper back. Hastily, he compared the signature with several he had at hand and was satisfied with the authenticity of it. Balchard emotionally poured out a glass of liquor and stood up.
To the Socialist Republic of Aldoria!
To
the Socialist Republic of Aldoria. Blacky tucked the guarantee and the note inside his jacket and stood up.
I am sorry to leave you so abruptly, gentlemen, but I have a dinner engagement.
By all means, keep it. You will declare the election by the end of the week?
Certainly, yes. Yes, indeed. Now, if I can be shown the way out of this place?
Stubb was wild. He had torn through every inch of the garden and the hotel without once being able to stop and ask anybody any questions for fear Blacky had been taken by the authorities, who would then, naturally, be desirous of taking Stubb as well. And when, at 9:30, distrait and on the verge of collapse to the point of needing a drink, no matter what risks he had to run to win it, he stumbled into the grill en route to the bar and found Blacky. Yes, it was certainly Blacky, sitting there with half a ton of silvery service spread out around him and sipping a glass of rare vintage as though he hadn't a thought in the world beyond his filet mignon. Bitterness welled in Stubb's heart. He marched straight up to the table and stood there glaring.
Hello, sweetheart. Have a drink?
I'll have a drink. I'll have 10 drinks. And then I'll tell you what I think of you.
Now, people are watching. Sit down, darling. This wine is very good. Here, waiter, another bottle of Chateau Voral, 96, and some steak and things for my good friend and physician. And now, Pierre, what were you saying?
Pierre. Blacky Lee, you are going to tell me what this is all about here and now, or I'll
Have a drink. There. Cool your throat, Nguyen. Cigarette? Special brand they keep here for His Highness in case he ever comes here, which he doesn't.
Give?
Cigarette?
No, damn you. Information. What's this all about?
Hush. Would it appease you to know that we are rich?
Rich?
Croesus, would it soothe you to know that we will soon go to Paris, buy off our dishonest debts, and live in luxury the rest of our lives?
Oh, you've got another idea. Blackie, I can take just so much. That last ammunition deal unsettled your mind. Just how you ever hypnotized these people into calling you your highness.
I didn't.
Then why did they do it? How do you rate such a banquet? Why did they let you run up such bills?
A running sovereign's credit is usually good in his own country.
And now you think you're the king of Aldoria. Honest to Pete, Blackie, while you're at it, you better promote us up a couple of cures, because if you ain't having a nervous breakdown, I ain't.
My boy, you've only been with me for only 3 years.
If it's only 3 years, I'm still 30 years older.
And for the past 3 years, His Royal Highness, the Archduke Philip of Aldoria, has been laid up dead drunk behind closed doors.
What's that got to do with it?
Why, 3 years ago, they threatened to cut him off without a yacht to his name if he didn't come home. That was Grotch's doing.
Who's Grotch?
Prime Minister of Aldoria.
How do you know all this?
A fellow walked up to me one day and paid me a gambling debt.
Stay on subject.
I am on subject, sweetheart. That was 10 years ago, in Paris, when life was in full tide. He came up to me while I was sitting at a sidewalk cafe and bowed and said, "Your Highness, here is the 3,000 francs you won last night."
Your Highness?
And so, of course, I said, "Thank you," and banked the roll. I thought he was either drunk or blind and more or less forgot about it until one night, a redhead dashed up to me in a cafe and threw a glass of champagne in my face and told me to go back to Aldoria, where women were more likely to look twice at pigs. And a waiter rushed up and wiped me off and said, "So sorry, Your Highness."
Maybe I'm getting it.
So I thought to myself that I had better look into this. I dug into the newspaper morgues and finally turned up a photograph of the Archduke Philip of Aldoria. He looked very much like me, except perhaps for the eyes, but in bright sunlight or a dim cabaret, no one could see any real difference between us. Later, I patched back my history and found out that a younger son of the Hohenbergs, to which royal family Philip also belongs, had been boosted forth into the world, had migrated to America, and had there set himself up in Denver, I think it was, as a pharaoh expert. Before he cold-decked his last customer, a violent chap, he managed to get himself married to a decent girl, and very likely I'm descended from that line. That is just a guessworked outline that I've figured out for myself.
Then you are royalty.
Me? Umpteen times removed with neither name nor arms, my pet. Somewhere in his past, every man is probably connected with a royal house. So, you see,
Well, what did you do when you found that out?
I had a plan. I studied Eldorian, learned the language backwards and forwards. I set up my scheme to the nth degree, and the Surette became inquisitive about some of the things I had been doing on the side, and I had to skip Paris. When that had blown over and I was back there, it was just in time to read the news 3 years ago that Philip had been called home or else. Certainly I wasn't risking my neck by walking into the man's own country. And so I lost all the hours I had spent working on his mannerisms and his signature. At least I thought I lost them. Have a drink of this with that steak, sweetheart.
Stop calling me sweetheart. If you think it's so dangerous to walk into Aldoria, why the hell are we here?
It was either starve to death or cross the border, and I detest starving. And it seems that I was right in buying that little container of mustache wax in case we had to come here in a rush. Some more wine, darling?
Don't call me darling. Now, don't you know that if you're caught impersonating a king, you'll hang? And me with you, damn it! Blacky, let's get the first train out of here before somebody finds out.
Oh, let's stick around and see what happens.
But think what can happen. Grouch will get word you're here, and he'll know Philip is really in the capital. We'll be lugged off to the nearest gallows. And I don't mean tomorrow.
Such gruesome thoughts after such a lovely dinner.
Guys like us make fine corpses. It's a crime in any country to impersonate an official. Think what it'll mean if a man is caught impersonating a king.
Merely an archduke.
He's king here, all right. Now listen to me, Blacky. You get fancy ideas sometimes, and sometimes they work. But you are headed straight for the deepest and darkest pit.
Your Highness.
The voice, soft and regretful, was very near. Blacky looked languidly to his right. The intruder had come up with a great deal of silence, considering the sword chains and spurs he wore. He had his gleaming plumed helmet in the crook of his arm and was bowing with all deference.
Well?
It is my sorrowful duty, Your Highness, to ask you to accompany me.
Blacky gauged his man. The fellow was young for a major, and therefore he must have brains.
Is this a common arrest?
No, Your Highness, forgive me. The Countess Zita, who I have the honor to serve as major of her household troops, earnestly requests your presence in her carriage outside, that she may escort you back to the capital and your palace. The escort is large, and you have nothing to fear, sire.
Stubb shakingly put down the forkful of steak.
I just remembered an engagement, Your Highness.
Oh, don't go, Doctor. Major, tell the Countess Zita that my physician and myself will be happy to avail ourselves of her courtesy. As soon as my wardrobe is packed, I shall join her in her carriage.
Asking your forgiveness, Your Highness, but we will have this hotel surrounded.
Well, Major, you have me there. A glass of wine?
Thank you, sire.
It is my privilege to join the Countess Zita in a few minutes. Here, take this unbroken bottle and a glass out to her with my compliments. It is really a rare vintage.
Blacky rose and sauntered from the room.
I won't go. It's straight to the gallows.
Then go out and get yourself stuck on a saber. Personally, it's worth it to ride a few kilometers with such a woman.
Stubbs sat on the box beside the coachman, a horse blanket about his shoulders, and shivered himself weary. He could hear the continuous murmur of voices inside and thought to himself that the pair down there certainly had found enough to talk about. What the devil were they talking about? He shifted restlessly and dragged the blanket more tightly about his shivering self. The carriage was making many small noises, and the clomp of hoofs was such that he could not distinguish their words until the cavalcade stopped a few moments for a toll bar to be raised.
But Wagner is so crude.
Crude? No, not crude, but vital. Barbaric, perhaps, but vital. The magic fire music.
Stubb groaned. Opera. Ye gods. Here were the lives of two perfectly good men at stake, and they talked about opera. Was Blacky out of his head? Shortly after midnight, the Snaky Mountain Trail flattened out far enough to allow an inn to crouch beside it, the windows dark and the tap room still. The major reined in, and without leaving his saddle, thundered against the door with the butt of his pistol.
Open wide for the Countess Zita.
That shout reacted upon the place as a bomb might have done. Lights flared and heads were thrust from windows, and hastily drawn boots leaped down steps.
Not yet. Thomas and Gregor, scour out that place. Benedict, take 3 men and beat the brush. Alert all!
The troopers loosed their cloaks and drew their carbines, and upon plunging mounts turned the yard and stables inside out. And just when it seemed that not one stone would be left of the inn, the major leaped down from his horse and himself handed the Countess Zita from the carriage across the yard and into the tap room. The Countess Zita seated herself at the largest table in the room, holding up the hem of her ermine cape so as not to dirty it on the floor.
Refreshments for my troop. Your best wine. For their horses, your best fodder. Make haste.
The innkeeper, familiar with such procedures, sent his potboys scurrying. Blacky Lee regaled himself with capon and buns, startling the Countess by his sparingness with the drink, and seemed to have no care in the world. At a side table with the major, Stubb ate with sorrow, but good appetite, for worry was nothing to take the edge from Stubb's hunger.
His Highness,
Said the young major.
looks astonishingly well. Did I understand properly when I heard that you were the physician responsible for this?
Huh? Me? Well, we have an effective treatment for that sort of thing in France.
Yes, I see what you mean.
After a pause, having remembered how cold it was on top of the carriage,
By the way, couldn't we have taken the railroad to the capital?
We could have, but we must be careful of His Highness. We are crossing the mountains in a roundabout way to foil assassination attempts. The railroad has been discovered mined twice in the past week.
Assassination?
Of course.
Then this country must be pretty bothered about something.
It's communism. His Highness, if you will forgive me, is not too easy on the people. Is that he leaves his affairs in the hands of others. The peasants object, you know, taxes and lack of justice and such things. The Sons of Freedom have grown very powerful the past year. Now, if I had my way about it, I would find this Belchard and hang him by his heels at the palace gate and ride down his followers with hounds. But no. Grouch fumbles around and expects everything to die down. Why, do you know, I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see a revolt within the next month or two. Of course, the nobles have adequate defenses if their troops don't desert. I'm sure of my troops, naturally. We'd win. But it would be a nasty while it lasted. If His Highness were assassinated now, that would put us all in a bad way, for it would leave the country without a figurehead, and the people would never stand for Grach ascending to the throne. As Grach, of course, would do. That is why we must be so careful with His Highness. The people, even though they know that he stays drunk most of the time, have some faith left in him. Grouch is the sore point.
Stubb could almost see pistols blazing from ambush. He ate in even deeper melancholy. Later, when they were leaving the place, Stubb had a chance to speak to Blacky.
Can't we make a break for it? It's suicide to go to the capital.
It's in the cards.
What will you do?
Try to brazen it out. There's a 50-50 chance.
Brazen it out? Oh, you mean...
Why not?
Stubb was suddenly too weak to answer. He climbed back up on the carriage box and wrapped the saddle blanket about him, staring bleakly into the crystal black of the cold hills. It was 2:00 when they arrived at the gates of Vorin, capital of Aldoria. The ancient city climbed steeply up a mountainside, many of its streets wide flights of steps. Stubb had a hazy impression of parks and parade grounds and rows of old trees and moats and balconies and streams and stone bridges, and then they were thundering into a courtyard through an arch fully 50 feet thick. The cries rolled and echoed as the guard tumbled out. The major leaped from his lathered horse and saluted the officer of the day.
The Countess Zita brings His Highness back.
Hello, Folly.
Said the officer of the day, and then turning to an orderly.
Prepare a billets for the Countess's troops. Inform Grouch that Countess Zita has arrived. Well, Folly, how have you been?
You evidently didn't understand me. His Highness is in that carriage. Turn out the royal guard. Not, of course, to tell you your business.
What's that? His Highness?
Right.
But, good Lord, His Highness hasn't been out of his quarters for a week. How can he be in that carriage?
He not only can be, but he is.
No, you're not drunk. Well, on your head be it, Folly. Trumpeter, the Imperial welcome. Runner, carry the word of the arrival of His Highness to Grouch. Orderly, inform General Brun of His Highness's arrival. Folly, this is crazy. His Highness hasn't been out of Vorn for 3 years.
The major stepped to the carriage door and threw it open. Blacky Lee stepped down and then turned to aid the Countess to the pavement. With the Countess's hand upon his wrist, Blacky Lee strolled between the ranks of scarlet and steel, up the steps and into the wide halls. Outside an iron-studded doorway stood an apoplectic old man. He was just tying the cord of his dressing gown when he saw Blacky and the Countess. His wrinkled old face went slack and then tightened into lines of pettish anger.
What the devil is this?
You let him out, and I brought him back.
Grouch peered nearsightedly up into Blacky's face.
What are you doing up and about at this hour of the night?
He was in Draken without escort, you careless simpleton. What the Belchard had been there?
But I put out your lights myself, not 4 hours ago. In Draken? I must be going mad.
I could have told you that years ago.
Here, step in here and close the door. Do you want me to stand here and catch pneumonia?
Blacky and the Countess followed him into the great hall, which served as his office and reception room. Ancient weapons rusted on the walls, and tapestries drooped behind massive dark chairs. Grouch, fussing and sputtering, got around in back of his desk as though it were a sort of barricade. His small-souled face was working when he next stared at Blacky.
Why are you wearing dark glasses? Take them off.
Blacky shrugged and took them off. Grouch had found some spectacles of his own, and with these he again peered closely at His Highness.
This is madness. How could you change so in 4 hours? And how could you be in Draken and in bed at the same time? There is something very queer about this. What happened to your whiskey bat?
Blacky picked up a cigarette from the box on Grouch's desk. He blew the smoke insolently at Grouch.
Go up and turn out the impostor who has taken my name for so long and bring him down here so that I may sentence him according to his deserts.
What's this?
Imposter?
Imposter. The man who got back from Paris was a fellow named Blacky Lee, a soldier of fortune, a gambler, and adventurer. He caused me to be drugged and took my papers and my name. Bring him down here so I can confront him with his crime and have him put away in a safe place where he can do no further harm.
Neither Zita nor Grouch moved for a space of seconds.
All right. We'll see what this is about. Captain Drat, ask His Highness to grant me the courtesy of an interview in my office.
The captain, who had been by the door and out of earshot, hurried away. Blacky Lee remained seated at the desk, indolently swinging one leg and smoking his cigarette. Sometime later, there was a commotion in the corridor and the sound of swearing. The doors burst inward, and Philip, Archduke of Aldoria, stood there, supported on either side by an officer. There was no doubt about his being drunk. He weaved into the room and came to a lurching halt, both hands doubled into fists and knuckled to the polished surface of the desk.
What now, you murdering old dummy? Can't you even let me sleep?
Grotch said not a word. His outstretched hand indicated Blacky Lee. Philip's reddened eyes focused upon Blacky. He was too angry to grasp that image immediately. He started to look back at Grotch, but suddenly snapped his glance at Blacky again. Philip stared. He made a pass at his eyes, blinked, and stared again.
What's this all about, Muse?
You know what this is all about. Surprised to see me, aren't you, Mr. Blacky Lee? Thought you'd put me out of the way forever, huh? Well, I come back. Back to claim what is rightfully mine. Guard, put this imposter...
Not so fast. I am afraid we'll have to have a little more proof than that. If you are really Philip, Archduke of Aldoria, then you would know the name of your grandmother on your father's side.
Ask him first.
That's fair. Answer the question.
What the devil? You have the insolence to cross-question me? Why, you monkey-faced old blackguard, I'll have your heart. I'll have you spitted and dragged through the streets.
Don't bluster. Answer up. If you are really Philip of Aldoria, you would know such a thing. If you don't...
Philip was white with rage, and his words would not come. But gradually it began to come home to him as he stared from Zita to Crotch, that he really was suspected of being an impostor.
How the devil can I remember what the old dames' names were?
See? Maria Barrett Dreden Buchan Rose Calvino, Duchess of Amgolvilna.
Philip glared and began to rage, but Grotch silenced him.
I admit that it is not too good a test. There is the matter of signature.
And he extended a pen to Philip, who finally snatched it and the fool's cap and scrawled his name so viciously that the ink flew. Calmly, Blacky took the pen and wrote Philip of Aldoria in a neat and proper hand. Grotch nodded thoughtfully over the paper and then looked at Blacky.
I am beginning to believe you. How was it that this fellow managed in Paris to...
Imbeciles! Apes! To drag a man out of a warm bed and then tell him he is not himself? Here, I'll make you prove it, you devil. You one and all know that Philip of Aldoria has a triangular scar upon his shoulder, received in a fall from a horse.
And he ripped off his pajama jacket and turned the scar to them. One and all, he said, knew it. But one man hadn't known it. Blacky Lee very calmly took off his cloak and then his tailcoat. He unsnapped his cuffs and then, as an afterthought it seemed, placed cloak and coat upon a chair near the wall, which, strangely enough, was just under a shield and a pair of long swords. There was a swish and the sing of suddenly living steel, and the point of the weapon was at the throat of the stupefied Captain Dret.
Be very quiet. All of you. Grotch, go to the door and order my carriage to be ready. If you fail,
He took down a dagger from beside the shield and held it by the point.
I used to be pretty good at throwing these.
Countess Zita stood with one hand to her breast, her eyes bright with interest, a pulse beating under the creamy smoothness of her throat. But Grotch knew what a wild chance, and a slim one, Blacky Lee had of getting past the guard in the hall.
Certainly.
Grotch stepped out as though on his way to the door, but before he had gotten out from behind his desk, he vanished. There was the excited clamor of an alarm gong he had touched off. Blacky stiffened. He had been outpointed twice in a night through stupid oversight. He hurled Dret from him and leaped for Philip. The Archduke tried to dodge and then found himself snatched and spun about and made into a shield just as the doors burst open and red-jacketed guards rushed in. They faltered and stopped, amazed at the strange duplication, uncertain.
Stand away.
Suddenly, Zita screamed. A shot sounded behind Blacky. Grotch, smoking pistol in hand, stood beside an open drawer. His seamed face bore a smile of triumph. Blacky's grip on Philip relaxed little by little until Philip was able to slide from his grasp. Blacky stood there weaving a little, his face pale, and he fell forward to the rug and lay there, a small hole in his shirt, turning slowly red. Join us again next week for part 2 of The Iron Duke. Will Blacky Lee make it? Will he ascend to power in Aldoria? Will he get together with Countess Zita? You'll have to tune in next week to find out.